Over the past half century, really, those who've landed on top have come increasingly to believe that their success is their own doing, the measure of their merit, and that they therefore deserve the bounty that the market bestows upon them. And by implication, that those who struggle, those left behind, must deserve their fate as well. It produces a kind of hubris among the winners and humiliation among the losers. It teaches the winners, if I believe that I achieved whatever I achieved through my own efforts, through my own doing, because everything was fair, then I'm likely to inhale too deeply of my own success, to forget the luck and good fortune that helped me on my way, to forget my indebtedness to those who make my achievements possible. And so this is what I call the tyranny of merit.
Bring Michael Jordan here, I'm sure you can get him, and have him come and defend himself about why he makes $31 million. And I think what you're going to realize is his life was a very, very tough one to get to the top, and that we are basically being the majority oppressing the minority in a different light. It's very easy to pick on him. Very easy.
Effort. You know what Rawls' answer to that is? Even effort depends a lot on fortunate family circumstances for which we can claim no credit. Psychologists say that birth order makes a lot of difference in work ethic, striving, effort. How many here, raise your hand, those of you here who are first in birth order? I am too, by the way. Mike, I noticed you raised your hand. If the case for the meritocratic conception is that effort should be rewarded, doesn't Rawls have a point that even effort, striving, work ethic is largely shaped even by birth order? Is it your doing, Mike? Is it your doing that you were first in birth order? So why should income and wealth and opportunities in life be based on factors arbitrary from a moral point of view? This way of thinking about success has deepened the divide between winners and losers. It has led the successful to look down on those who struggle, and it has led many working people who do not have meritocratic credentials of fancy university degrees to feel that the work they do is not valued, is not respected in the way perhaps it once was. To feel that in a highly technological, highly professionalized, credentialized society, that elites look down on them. This has always been present, always been part of the American story. But it's been, at least at times, kept contained underground at the periphery. The brighter ideals and aspirations predominated. When I was growing up, and through the 60s, for example, the civil rights movement, and the fight for racial justice, and the protest against the war in Vietnam, and the attempt to combat poverty with the Great Society. But from 2016, it became elevated with the presidency of Donald Trump. We've struggled more directly and more conspicuously, more frontally with the dark side, finding public expression.
On the stage now.
On the stage, public expression, rather than kept at the margins and at the periphery. and finding a voice in the media and in social media especially. And now in a presidential campaign that will be a rematch of the one from last time. We've seen as a backlash against elites, especially against well-educated elites, professional elites. Donald Trump has been very effective at tapping into the grievances of people who feel they've been left behind and looked down upon.
Humiliation.
The politics of humiliation. And it's this sense of humiliation, I think, that opened the way for the politics of grievance that Donald Trump has been able to exploit. In the United States today, and in many parts of the world, is a politics of anger, resentment, and grievance without mutual recognition, without recognizing the value of the contributions that people make from different walks of life. We will not really begin to address the resentments that now afflict our politics and have accentuated some of the darkest strands in social life.
我想大家去国子监，在中国这个 meritocracy 是这么的受尊重。你知道梁启超他去那个访问澳大利亚的时候，因为澳洲人怎么理解他嘛？举人对他们就翻译成那个 bachelor， 就学士学位，他们的进士是翻译成 master degree， 然后他不是当过长沙实物学堂的那个总教习嘛，就翻译成 president of Hunan University， 翻译成。所以很逗，所以误读。我真的挺想带去看国子监的，这特别对着他这个写的书的感觉，加上拼音线。It's after 1960s.
Yes.
I mean, the Beach Boys, the Beatles. I mean, right. What kind of mood at the time? Be a high school student at the time.
Well, almost everyone in those days had long hair. I did too. As you can see from the picture.
Not so long.
Not so long. So long.
Yeah.
And it was a time of questioning, just as you say. It was a time of cultural and political change.
Yeah.
As for me and many of my friends in that high school, we were ambitious, we were competitive with one another, I think excessively so. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up, but I thought maybe I would go into politics. Well, this is when I was having a debate with Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
This was before he became president.
Yeah. He's governor of California?
He was governor of California.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be interesting to invite Ronald Reagan to the high school to have a debate, because in my high school, very few of us, young people, agreed with Ronald Reagan's philosophy. And he was for the war in Vietnam, we were against it. He was against the United Nations, critical of the United Nations. We were for it. He was against 18-year-olds having the right to vote. And we were in favor, of course.
Yeah, he's much conservative.
He was very conservative.
Yeah.
And in the school, we were much more liberal. And so I invited him to have a debate. I sent an invitation to his office and got no reply. And then my mother read in a magazine that he liked jelly beans, the candy. You know, those colorful candies.
I know.
So I bought a 6-pound bag of jelly beans.
How big? 6 pounds?
It's about this big.
The box.
And put it in a box with a bow. and with an invitation. And I took it to his house. He lived not too far from my high school. And there were guards at the house and wanted to know what I had in the box. It looked suspicious. I said jelly beans. So they sort of searched the bag, and they decided it was innocent enough, and they let me deliver it to his home. And a few days later, he called and said he would come to the school.
Wow.
And so we gathered everyone in the gymnasium, actually. That was the only place large enough. There were 2,400 students. He and I sat on the stage, and I asked him the toughest questions I could. And I had prepared, and I was a high school debater. And I thought this would be an easy matter to win a debate with Ronald Reagan.
The old man.
But he replied to each question respectfully, thoughtfully, with a sense of humor. And I realized after a half an hour, I hadn't really won the debate. And then we opened the questions to students, and the same thing happened. And the hour ended, and I thanked him, and he left. He hadn't persuaded us to change our minds to his conservative philosophies. But somehow, he had been gracious and amiable and charming, and he displayed to us, well, two things. First, the qualities that enabled him to be elected president 9 years later. And second, what I learned from that was the importance of listening respectfully, which is what he did, even though he did not change our minds.
If you can meet him, what kind of thing you want to say to him?
You mean if I could meet that young guy there?
Yeah, younger guy.
That younger guy.
Yeah, almost 50 years ago.
Well, what would I say? What would I say to that young man there? I would say debating is not a matter of winning an argument only. Really thinking and persuading depends on listening with respect. And in many ways, that's what I try to teach my students.
这次美国之行，从哈佛到 New Orleans， 像我对自己青春志向的某种，好像又是觉醒，又是重新的确认，这么一个过程。这次觉醒你会有更强的中国的意识，就是我处在一个什么样的视角和一个背景，我的社会最需要什么？可能我在20多岁的时候是模糊的对这一切感兴趣，其实你对中国的背景也并不清楚，其实完全是两回事情。他被认为是一个社群主义的一个代表人物，他的整个的思想成熟之后，82年写出第一本书之后，他这个之后的整个人生经历是跟整个的里根撒切尔这一套就是全球化和新自由主义这套兴起有关系的，他成为这样的一个浪潮的一个批评者。这个批评当然有他的很多道理嘛，但是就是很有趣这个过程。我们这一代，包括这2代中国人，是这个所谓的这个潮流最大的受益者。包括他在批评的是绩效，他的暴政。那中国一直是贤良选拔，对我们中国人很尊重所谓的科举制度，尽管它有各种各样的问题，不管它是不是单一，他仍然认为是这个社会流动性的一个重要的保证，而且可能某种上最公平的一个保证。所以我觉得这是不同的国家之间的差异吧。我们这叫等待哲学是吧？等待哲学。从那边过来的。
It's raining again.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. So, do you like this?
Yes, I watch from your YouTube.
Yeah. Here it
So
is.
who's James Otis?
He was a leader in the colonial times during the time of independence.
Is he a good speaker?
I don't know. I don't know.
Wow.
And then this was built as a monument to the Civil War. It was after the U.S. Civil War.
So the name is on the wall. It's
Yes.
all about died.
Yes. Yeah.
For Civil War. Can we go to steak?
Yeah. We can.
So why dialogue, debating is so important for society?
It's how we come to identify the meaning of justice and the common good. We have to ask the question, what is justice? What is a good society? What is the meaning of a good life? What civic virtues should we seek to cultivate? So if we care about bringing about justice and the common good, then we're kind of propelled into a dialogue about what justice and the good life really are. Because, of course, there are, and have always been, competing ideas about the meaning of justice and the common good. That's why the great philosophers of the past, Plato, Confucius, Aristotle, and so on, they had different ideas. And those who followed in the Western tradition, including John Locke and John Stuart Mill and Kant and Hegel and Marx, they all had different conceptions of the meaning of justice and questions of the good life and of civic virtue. If they disagreed, it's not surprising that we disagree. And yet, what's interesting is we have the sense that those arguments, though they seem impossible finally to resolve, they keep going. And they keep attracting our attention. And we want, in each generation, to figure out for ourselves what it means to seek a just society, what it means to aspire to the common good.
So if we were in the stage, I mean, the great soul, that Kant, Marx, they're all alive, actually.
Yes.
Interact with each student, with you.
Well, that's the idea. That's the fundamental idea, that these great philosophers are not just episodes in the history of ideas. They're not just museum pieces. They are episodes in arguments in which we are still engaged today. So that if I do my job well in teaching philosophy to this generation of students, they will feel as if they are in conversation with Plato and Aristotle and Kant. And because philosophy is a tradition of thought and argument that builds upon and refers always to the past.
You think why? Public philosophy is so important for society.
Public philosophy is an attempt to find meaning together that is not purely technocratic, not purely practical, not only about economic questions, but about larger questions too. It's because we've been so preoccupied with GDP, with markets, with economic growth, and with technology. And it creates a moral vacuum. And unless it's filled with deliberation about public questions, it will be filled by narrow, intolerant, dangerous ideologies. And that's my worry. Let me give here one recent example of this. During the pandemic, in many ways, the pandemic highlighted inequalities that existed before the pandemic. A great many of us had the luxury of being able to work from home during the pandemic, to teach from home, to work from home, to write from home. Delivery workers, grocery store clerks, warehouse workers, truck drivers, nursing assistants, home health care providers, child care workers. Now, these are not the best paid or the most honored workers in our societies. But for a moment during the pandemic, we called them essential workers. We applauded them at the end of the day. We put up signs thanking them. This could have been a moment for a broader public debate about how to bring their pay and recognition into better alignment with the importance of the contributions they make. But it didn't happen. The pandemic receded. We never really had that moment. And now we've gone back to business as usual.
So you think meritocracy is part of reason?
And I think the answer to that question is connected to the widening inequalities of recent decades, and also to the changing attitudes towards success that have accompanied the widening inequalities. I'd like to invite you to offer your views about an incident, a story that I read about, where a 17-year-old boy sold his kidney. You all know the story. He bought an iPad and an iPhone. But how many think it's okay? It's a free market, and there's nothing wrong with it.
Because I study economics, and I think every adult is an economic man that he has to be responsible for his behaviors. He clearly knows the consequence of losing one kidney. We should give him the chance to take that risk.
To choose for himself. A lot of people agree with that. All right, that's very good. So I would like to hear from those who object. Yes. And stand up.
Well, I think it's wrong because give your kidney to others. Maybe you feel it's okay, but in fact, for the respect of a person, it is not respect of life.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Even facing the same concept like justice.
Yeah.
You see the difference from different countries?
Yes, yeah. It's prompted me to reflect on why there are these differences when I encounter them. When I had these conversations with young people in China in the 2000s, what struck me was, first, they did have very strong pro-market moral intuitions, as I mentioned. And I would put a lot of examples to students and to the audience, asking them whether they think this or that social practice should be governed by money or by other norms. So I put questions like this. What struck me was the moral intuitions about buying and selling were similar in the US and China. In Eastern Europe, it was similar. In Poland, for example. Most European countries, it was quite different.
You think why? Why? Similar mentality?
I think it's because, especially in the early 2000s, that China had experienced, the young generation had grown up with the market reforms. And it had been a period of tremendous economic growth.
It's kind of freedom for them.
Yeah, it was an expression of freedom and rising affluence, but especially of freedom. But at the same time, they were looking for meaning that markets could not provide. And so the search for meaning persisted even after the market triumphalist moment. And I think that one of the reasons that people were drawn to the Justice book was this sense that there are moral meanings that lie beyond markets and beyond economics. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe we're facing two choices or different choices. We can't choose the best one. There are no best one. Just less evil. Just less evil one, maybe.
But I wouldn't regard these as closed alternatives. I would ask a different question. How is it possible to combine the benefits of market arrangements and technological innovations with sources of meaning, deliberation, dialogue, reflection that can answer to higher human purposes and ends? Our mistake is not to use markets to organize economic activities. Our mistake is not to hope that technological innovations will deliver real improvements to the way we live our lives. Our mistake is the tendency to think that markets and technology by themselves can define human purposes and ends. They can't. And when we put too much faith in them, when they become a kind of faith, almost a kind of religious faith, markets and technology, then we're bound to be disappointed. And when the disappointment comes, the disappointment may take harsh, dangerous forms.
So the situation is so complicated. What kind of solution we can provide? We try to build dialogue, but very difficult.
I think we need to focus less on arming people for meritocratic competition and focus more on contending with inequalities of income and wealth, but also inequalities of honor, recognition, and esteem. And this means we have to renew the dignity of work. We have to broaden our conception about what counts as a valuable contribution to the common good. And we need the kind of class-mixing institutions in civil society that will lead us to encounter one another, to be in one another's presence, not only on our phones, all the more so when our societies are divided and polarized, because the people we encounter tend to be people only like ourselves. We need to overcome that.
But every solution, every theory always has its own flaw.
Yeah.